I'd like to start by welcoming everybody here today to what truly is a very historic event. As near as we can tell, this is the first time that any memorial service has been held on these grounds where the forefathers of our township are buried, many for nearly 200 years. These are the pioneers and the settlers of this region. And if it wasn't challenging enough to be a pioneer and a settler back in the late 1700s, three of these individuals chose to take time and serve their country as well. And it's those three individuals that we choose to honor in particular here today on this Memorial Weekend. Right now I'd like to invite Dennis Solon. Dennis is the manager of the wildlife area, and actually if it wasn't for Dennis's help, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish what we have back here.
First and foremost, I want to welcome you all here to Killbuck Marsh Wildlife Area. I want to thank our veterans for your sacrifices. Without your sacrifices, we wouldn't have the America we know today. It's just overwhelming to see the turnout. And you're too kind, Matt, the Historical Society and the former family members and everyone involved has done all the work. We've just allowed it to happen, and we're absolutely thrilled that this is here, and there's finally some recognition for the people, settlers of our county. The only problem today for me makes me feel pretty old, because I remember starting out, this was basically field. So I'm looking around now, it's a full-grown woods. But thank you so much for coming, and the Ohio Division of Wildlife welcomes you here, and anything we can do in the future to accommodate you. So at the Historical Society of family members, we will. Thankfully, the rain held off.
All right, I'm going to introduce Dave Mann. He's the Vice President of the Historical Society. Dave's going to do a little history lesson on the cemetery now.
Okay, this Butler-Morgan Cemetery, and it's also been known over the years at different times as Buchanan Cemetery or the Booker Cemetery, because those were the landowners that owned the farm at different times. As far as the history of the cemetery, there's probably a lot more that we don't know than what we do know. There were no written records kept that we're aware of in the cemetery. What we do know is in 1808, James Morgan, his wife Hannah, 10 children, and Thomas Butler came here to this area, probably right down over the hill somewhere, and started the first settlement outside of the city of Worcester. It was in Franklin Township. Now, we've got to assume that the cemetery was established soon after that. They arrived in 1808. In 1809, Thomas Butler married James Morgan's daughter, Rebecca. That was the first marriage in Wayne County. And we know they're both buried here. I say we don't know for sure what year the first burial was. In 1812, a man by the name of Thomas Sowers arrived here with his wife Esther Cornstalk Sowers, who was a Shawnee. She was the daughter of the Shawnee war chief Cornstalk. They came in 1812. 3 years later, Thomas died. That is the first one that we know positive when he died and was buried here. The probate records in Wayne County say that he was buried in the cemetery on the Jacob Booker farm. That tells me the cemetery had been established before he was buried. So we know there were people buried here before that. Then a few years later, in 1822, James Morgan, the original settler here, he passed away. We know he's buried here. And he was also one of the Revolutionary War veterans. In between that, we don't know how many people were buried here. We know we've got names of a couple that were died within that time that we've been able to locate. But as I say, there's no real records. In 1830, Isaac Munson, who lived right across 83 now, right, actually up on the farm that I own part of. He's another Revolutionary War veteran, and he's buried here. So that's the three we know of Revolutionary War veterans. Then later, in 1837, Thomas Butler died. His stone's right here. In 1849, his wife died. They're all buried here. His wife, 1849, that could be one of the last ones. We don't know for sure. But by that time, the cemeteries were established at Nonpareil, at Fredericksburg, at Moreland. There were other cemeteries around that were being used. So we don't think there was much activity here after 1849, 1850. And from that period up until the 1930s, early 40s, the cemetery was not well maintained. It was here. Nobody bothered it, but nobody really took care of it. We were told, and we have not verified it, that some of the stones were taken and used for a sidewalk down by the house that used to be on this farm. We tried to look down there. We couldn't find anything. So whether that's correct or not, we don't know. The first time I came across the cemetery was about the time the state bought it, 1971, 72. And at that point, there were only a couple stones left here. And it was getting pretty well growed up. The edge of the field was right back behind where the last of you are standing there. That has all been second growth since then. But 10 years later, in the early 80s, the stones were all gone. There was no sign of any stones. It was really hard to even locate the cemetery. Now, in the mid-80s, these two stones were recovered. And it's kind of a long story, but what it ended up with, there was an Amishman over in the Maysville area, called the township. And my father was a township trustee. They called him, said they had two stones that they thought came from the Butler-Morgan cemetery, and they were recovered. We picked them up, but at that point, it didn't seem like there was any reason to put them back here. We figured if they did, they'd just get vandalized and lost again. So one of the descendants of the Butler family has had them since then. They will probably end up at the Historical Society in Moreland before very long. And from that point on until about 2012, I was asked to speak at the Wayne County Bicentennial Celebration about Franklin Township, and I spoke about this cemetery and the people buried here. And I stated then that I wanted to get this cemetery cleaned up and presentable, and I wanted to do it within the next year. Well, obviously that didn't happen. It's 5 years later. But now it has. I'm really pleased with the way it's turned out. I cannot take credit for that. Right there's the one. They organized it and done the majority of that work. A year ago, we had a group of people, and Matt organized it. We got back here. We were expecting 8 to 10 people to show up. We had about 30. We were here with chainsaws, weed eaters, skid loaders, cut trees, come back later, ground out the stumps, and cleaned all this up. And that's where we're at now. It was a lot of hard work, but I think the hardest part might be yet to come. And I think that is going to be getting people involved, that we can guarantee that this location and the people buried here are never lost and forgotten again. This was neglected for well over 100 years. We cannot let that happen again. And to do that, we've got to get some younger people involved, people that are willing to help, because some of us that done it this time are at the point where we're not going to be able to do it too many more years. Time's creeping up faster than we care to admit. but we have to get somebody that can continue and keep this thing going.
You notice he gave you all the history and those dates, and Dave did not have any notes in front of him, just so you know. At this time, we're going to ask Diane Bell if she would come up and sing the national anthem.
Detail.
Princess, hold!
By the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's flashing hand. Broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, for the ramparts we watched will so gallantly stream, and the rockets' red glare upon bursting in air.
Now I'd like Ann Shantz. Ann's from the Daughters of the American Revolution. If she'd like to come up and say a few words.
I am delighted to be here today and would like to thank the Moreland Community Historical Society on behalf of the Worcester Wayne chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution for the opportunity for us to participate in this service to honor these 3 Revolutionary War veterans. We wish to thank everyone that was involved in this project for your efforts in restoring this cemetery and honoring these patriots. The DAR is a nonprofit, non-political, volunteer women's service organization and boasts more than 185,000 members in over 3,000 chapters across the United States and internationally. Members are dedicated to 3 main goals. First, promoting patriotism. Second, preserving American history. And thirdly, securing America's future through better education for children. Any woman age 18 or older who can prove lineal descent from a patriot of the American Revolution is eligible for membership. Since its founding in 1890, over 900,000 women have become members of the DAR to honor their heritage and to make a difference in their communities. The Worcester Wayne chapter, being one of 100 chapters in Ohio, has served our local community in many ways. We have supported DAR schools, donated flags to various organizations, promoted Constitution Day in our local schools, and helped veterans in numerous ways, and honored Revolutionary War veterans like we are doing here today. It is truly a privilege to participate in honoring these 3 Revolutionary War patriots. We must remember that every single patriot had some important role in the Revolutionary War. I have often thought how things might be very different today if only a few things had gone differently back then. That is why the memory of every single patriot should be honored. I give thanks and praise to our Heavenly Father for working in a mighty way to weave together the freedom and comforts that we have today. It is important to remember that these men volunteered to fight the British. And when they did so, they were going up against one of the great world powers. and they did not know the outcome of their cause as we do today. The British dealt very, very harshly with people who they considered to be traitors. And yet, these men stepped forward anyway and risked everything. We must never, ever forget that. Again, we appreciate this opportunity and privilege to honor these men. Congratulations and many thanks to the Historical Society for a job very well done. Thank you.
Now we'd like to have our special guest speaker, Ohio State Senator Frank LaRose, to come up.
Thank you so much, and first of all, to the folks from Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Wildlife, thanks for the work that you guys do on a daily basis, but thanks particularly for your assistance with this project here. To the Historical Society, thank you for devoting your time so that we can remember all of these who are buried here, but in particular these three men who served our country so nobly. And to all of you, thank you for coming. On a holiday weekend, on a Saturday, there are other things that any of us could be doing, but we're here to remember, to never forget. Those are often themes, slogans you hear after a tragedy or after someone is lost. You say, well, we'll never forget him. We'll always remember their sacrifice, that kind of thing. Well, today as we stand here, over 200 years after the first of these veterans was buried here, we are fulfilling that commitment that was made many generations ago, that they will never be forgotten, that their sacrifice will be remembered. All of us who ever served in uniform, including the men of the Triple Nickel behind me, and many of you, I'm sure, raised our right hand and swore an oath to protect and defend the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath did not come with an expiration date. It didn't say until the day I leave the service or until my enlistment date is up. It's a lifetime commitment to protect and defend. And as we know, this weekend, on Monday, we paused as a nation, thankful in particular for those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. But everyone who serves did so in a way where they were willing to make that sacrifice. Why do we do that? Well, of course, the men and women who serve in the armed forces are very devoted to their brothers and sisters, their fellow soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines to their left and right on the battlefield. But a bigger idea than that, I believe, is what motivates us to serve, those of us who have worn the uniform. And that is this idea of America, not just this land. It's a beautiful land. It's a great place to live. It comes with wonderful natural resources and all of that. But it's not just this land, America. It's this idea, America. It's the idea that these three men picked up their rifles and went to fight for. It's that idea that every man and woman is born free and that our rights don't come from government, but they come from our Creator. And if any government tries to take away those rights, then that government is illegitimate and you have to fight against it. That's what they knew. And they knew that all other routes had been exhausted, and that when this group of farmers, when this group of settlers decided that they were going to take up arms against the world's most powerful military, they didn't know what would happen, but they knew that they had God Almighty behind them because their cause was just. And that's why today we stop to think of them. Now, as a soldier myself who wore the uniform for 10 years, I think that it's part of my obligation to remember their service, because across generations, regardless of whether you're serving today or whether you served 50 years ago or 230 years ago, there's a connection, there's a camaraderie, it's a brotherhood and a sisterhood of the men and women who wore this uniform and who fought for our country. And so I'm proud to be here among you to remember their service and to hold up their service as something that's worthy of remembrance. Final message is that the most important people here today are these young men and women that are sitting here among us. Many of us understand what I'm talking about and understand what our freedom means and that it is worth fighting for and yes, even worth dying for. But you see, that sense isn't just passed down in our DNA. It's not just something we're born with. It's something we've been taught. It's something that our parents and grandparents taught us, that there are things so precious that they're worth fighting for. It's your job to teach your children and grandchildren those same messages, that this country, this idea of America is worth fighting for. And I'd ask you to take the opportunity of Memorial Day to talk to them about service and sacrifice and what it means. And for those of you that serve, talk about your time in the armed forces and what it meant to you to wear the uniform. Thanks to each and every one of you for coming out here this morning for this special occasion. Let's never forget not only these three men who are buried here, but all of our ancestors who came before us. And thank you so much for the chance to be with you this morning. God bless.
I just have a couple announcements before I ask for the salute. There's one person I'd like to recognize that anytime we've ever been back here working was the first one to want to be here and helped with every aspect of what we did. He's also the person who has possession of these stones and brought them back today. Keith, where are you? Stand up. Keith grew up just over the hill down below here as a little boy. His family is directly connected to this cemetery, and I know this meant a lot to Keith, and we're happy to do it.
Appreciate everything, dude.
Immediately following the salute, everybody here is invited to go back to Gail Miller's. We're having kind of a hamburger, hot dog cookout, picnic lunch. Every single person here is invited. We'll try to feed you all one way or the other. Okay.
During the playing of taps at a 21 fire volley, we ask all people to stand and place their right hand over their heart. All military personnel will render the military salute. And after, you can be seated. Thank you. Detail. Hands up. Port. Arm. Half right. Face. Ready. Aim. Fire. Aim. Fire. Aim. Fire. Half left. Face. Present. Arm. Order. Hold. Honors rest.
Thank you all for coming.
Detail. Hit. Foot. Ball out.